time to check in on what is going on at Hearts Football LLC. And for this, we bring in Jordan Gardner to find out what is exactly going on at Hearts Football LLC. Mr. Gardner, thanks for dropping by this morning.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
I want to go back to the beginning of all the stories and things like that. And the most recent news that was there goes with Kelty Hearts.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that as businessmen, you look for assets that you think that you can sit there and you see that they're a diamond in the rough, and it's an 80% stake that the group ended up with. What was it about this diamond in the rough at the bottom of League One in that pyramid in Scotland that you sat there and you're like, yeah, I think we can do something here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I do a lot of consulting in the global football soccer world, and I had done several deals in Scotland, Scottish Championship, Scottish Premiership, and I really liked the model in and around a lot of the clubs in Scotland. It was very reminiscent of deals and clubs I looked at in England, which obviously has become quite for a lot of Americans. But the clubs actually, for the most part, were well run, financially sustainable. Obviously, it's a much smaller country and a much smaller league than England, but it had the same characteristics. And so I decided, hey, you know what? I want to put a group together and buy a club. And I started to think about what is a financial model that works from an investment perspective. Like, I love soccer. I've been involved in big clubs, small clubs in many different countries. And most of the models, they don't work. They're heavy loss makers. You're chasing promotions. You're chasing selling players. I mean, this is a problem a bit to a certain extent in the United States as well. We're hoping the World Cup comes and magically all these clubs are worth 5 times what we paid for them. So I looked at some of the smaller clubs, League One, League Two, down the pyramid, and many of these clubs were either break even financially or profitable. And whether that was because they made runs in the Scottish Cup or because their cost basis was quite low, a lot of them were part-time. It felt like some of these clubs, and for me personally, I had built companies. I have a background in technology. Like, the idea of building a football club from scratch without the existing liabilities you see at many clubs was really interesting. There are a lot of clubs out there you can buy that are, quote, distressed, that maybe have a large fan base and a great history. And I don't fault anyone for doing that, but you're inheriting millions and millions of dollars in liabilities and players on long-term contracts and issues with your stadium. This club had none of that. And so I started to look at this club, Kelty Hearts, and said, it's in a great geographic location. It's in a good country, doesn't lose money, has a great story, has a bit of a Wrexham story. We're not doing a Wrexham here. I get tired of hearing the Wrexham thing a little bit, as much as I have a lot of respect for what they've done. Right. This club has gotten promoted 3 times from the 6th division up to League One, and now they've been in League One for 3 seasons. Obviously, they're struggling a bit this year, but for us, we think we can take this club to the next level. It's a small community, but it's a growing community. And we know there's limitations. There's a ceiling on how big this club can be. But whether it's, cup games where, we're playing a big club in Dunfermline this weekend, whether it's getting promoted to the Scottish Championship and being the best financially sustainable, well-run part-time club in the country, we think that model in and around the kind of smaller clubs makes a lot more sense than coming in to a club that's losing a lot of money and you're just chasing. And that's not fun for anyone. That's not sustainable. And that doesn't work in the long run for many, many football clubs.
How much due diligence in these cases do you do? How far back was the thought pattern here to try to sit there and pin down Kelty and go, yeah, that's the one that we're going to be looking at?
Yeah, so this specific club I spent about 6 months on. So to your point a little bit earlier, the club is obviously not having a great season on the pitch. But when we first started this conversation, it was before the season. So we kind of had this model in and around the club before we knew what the results would be this season. I had spent enough time in Scottish football on the consulting side over a period of years that I didn't need to do a lot of diligence. I knew the landscape. I knew which clubs I thought were more attractive, which ones weren't. Typically, if that wasn't the case, it would, if you do it properly, it could take months, if not years, to properly vet a market and look at clubs and figure out, because again, a lot of it depends on what's your risk tolerance. What are you looking for as an investor, an investment group? Is it infrastructure? Is it a youth academy? Is it good geographic location? Is it a combination of all of the above? And so it's figuring out what your priorities are. Luckily, in this case, I had a good lay of the land going in, so it wasn't too difficult for me.
When you look in these situations, and I know that you're looking at it 3-dimensionally, you're probably looking at it from first team, possibly women's, if there's a component there, academy, community, all these kinds of things. How risk averse are you? How realistic are you? You're going to be losing money, but do you set a ceiling for yourself when you're looking at all of this stuff in 3 dimensions? Where are your limits these days?
Yeah. I think the good thing about a transaction like this is when we bought into the club or bought the club, all the money that we bought the club for goes into the club as growth capital, which isn't always the case, or oftentimes is not the case. If you own a football club and I want to buy it, I'm giving you the money and you're putting it in your pocket. In this case, because it's a community-owned club, we were able to commit a certain amount of capital over a period of years to buy the club. So that gives us a lot of room to invest in infrastructure, growth, women's academy. They don't really have a lot of that. They have a very young academy. They don't have a women's team. There does need to be some infrastructure investment. So from a risk factor, there's very low risk because we've committed this money anyway as part of the transaction. So for us, it's a free pool of money to grow the club. And for us, that amount of money, will last us the whole time horizon of the investment. Really what comes into play is how do you allocate that, right? I think a lot of people in European football might come in if they don't know any better and just dump all that money into the squad, the first team squad. We got to win games. And I think, there might be a little bit of that, but for us, it's more holistic about infrastructure, about the, as you said, women's, all the areas of the football club. How do we improve and bring it up? Player performance, all these kind of things. So, I think what's interesting is that clubs of this size and this level, and you could probably go to the National League in England or the third or fourth tier in France, Spain, Italy, same thing, is they don't have a lot of resources. They don't have people who've run, for the most part, sophisticated football clubs before. They don't have a lot of capital backing. So we're kind of coming in, checking all of those boxes and saying, we think we can be way ahead of our competitors in terms of bringing in this expertise and be able to hit well above our weight. And so I think that's kind of what we're thinking. But generally from a risk tolerance perspective, it's quite low. The budgets are low, the liabilities are low. Very much this is all, we look at this as an all upside project. We think there's lots of room for promotions and success on the pitch. They haven't sold players at any sort of significant level. That's upside. The academy, you're probably looking 5, 6, 7 years down the road to start to sell players as well to the academy. That's all upside as well. So really it's this balance between keeping your costs down and, realizing the upside.
How hard is it to be patient in an investment like this? Because I know the fans have an expectation. You as a businessman and Hearts football has an expectation when it comes to profit and loss. How long did it take you to understand, okay, we've got to be patient in this and not expect an instant return?
So it's not difficult for me. I've done this many times before. I think if you are a new investor, if I threw you into a European football club, it might be challenging. I think a lot of folks don't understand, particularly when it comes to changing culture, building rosters, selling players, that takes years. For us, at my last project in Denmark, it took us about 3 full seasons before we start to see any sort of ROI on player sales. It took us 3 to 4 seasons to see any sellable players coming out of our academy. We did get our club promoted relatively quickly within a year or two, but no one should ever go into this looking for dividends. Like, hey, we just made a profit this season, we're going to put some money in our pocket. That's not really how this should work. It's much more long-term time horizon. You're really looking for the financial benefits down the road when you exit. So in this case, it's like we get the club to the championship. Presumably we're profitable. We're the best part-time team in the country. Then an investor group comes in and says, you know what, we're interested in this to take it to the next level and level up the club. So that's the way you should look at it. I realize not every investor does it that way. Again, not difficult for me just because I've done it before. But you have to be patient in this industry. There's no quick fixes. One window will not magically, example, Kelty Hearts is struggling this season. We're struggling. Coming in this winter window, there's very little we can magically do to turn over the roster. You have players under contract. You don't have a great selection of players available in the winter window. So it's going to take a period of time to revamp the roster. So that's, I think, one example where you really do have to be patient.
How do you, and I guess this is a two-part question, when it comes to the idea of American investment in European football? I imagine the perception going in a bunch of different circles, and I probably could do subheading Swansea City as a part of this, the ugly American aspect of it. Oh, you're just here because you're here to do turnkey and you're just here to make money and blah, blah, blah. And I imagine that there's that perception still in some circles of Americans are only over here to do that. Do you still fight that in your consultations, or or is your reputation pretty much in his Heart's reputation? So it's like, okay, yeah, we know where they're coming from.
It's a little bit easier for us because people have kind of seen proof of concept that what I've done in global football is not what you described, that this is an experienced executive who respects the culture of European football. I think it's what I've seen is less a little bit about, oh, these Americans are coming in just to make money. More of these Americans are coming in and they don't know what they're doing, or they're not respectful of the culture, or they just they're running with a chicken with their head cut off. And I mean, I understand that there are American groups, no offense to them out there, that do that. And it's unfortunate when we see that. For me, it's a little bit different. And that's not to say that I haven't seen a lot of pushback. I think there is a resistance to change in European football, that maybe this is global as well, a real resistance. And people like myself, one of the efficiencies, one of the reasons I do this is because I think football clubs are generally poorly run, and there's opportunities to modernize them, bring in some American ideas. And there is a lot of resistance to that. But I will say, I think it's very market dependent and club dependent. Our reaction last week for Kelty Hearts was as positive as a reaction I've ever seen doing a deal in Europe. Part of that is, I think folks in Scotland really like Americans. It's a smaller club. But to your point, like Swansea, the amount of, again, I was just a passive minority investor in my Swansea deal, but the amount of hate and really disgusting stuff I got on social media over the years was crazy. And I can't even imagine what the majority investors got and what the folks at the club got. So there is a toxic environment in and around some of these clubs, and that does seep in partly because of foreign and American ownership. But that's, we talk about the passion for the sport in Europe and how amazing that is. The flip side of that is there is a bit of a toxic kind of association with some of these football clubs. Really, generally ones I haven't been involved with too closely, but I see it on the periphery, and it's not great.
Full disclosure, member Swans Trust, have been for probably a decade, because I liked the idea of the Swans Trust as a part of what they were going to be doing with Swansea City. And then Jason Levian and that group comes in, and I'm going to bite my tongue. Jordan Gardner hanging out with his Hearts Football LLC with the purchase of Kelty Hearts. Now we're at the bottom of the League One table right now, and kind of discussing MCOs and a bunch of things involving American business investment when it comes to European soccer. Have you always thought of yourself as a builder?
Yes. I played some, I don't know how many people know this, but I played like PDL. It's not called PDL anymore here. It was a USL League 2, I think is what it's called now.
Yeah.
I played, semi-professional soccer here. Then I started a company when I was in college. I didn't play college soccer because I was working on a company, but building small businesses, building companies, it's frankly not that different than being involved in professional sports or soccer clubs, particularly at the lower level or the minor league level. A lot of it, last week when I was in Scotland, folks are probably thinking like, oh, you're talking to the media, this is fun and this is games. Like, I'm dealing with staffing, I'm dealing with HR, I'm dealing with our payroll, like that. It's a small business at the end of the day. But yes, my background is building companies for sure.
So what was it like when you had that first success, when you were trying to be that builder, and you sat there and it's like, yeah, I think I can do this? What was it like hitting that first one and heading on to the second one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first kind of light bulb for me is when my company started to have a lot of success when I was still in college. And I was kind of like, oh, whoa, like I can actually, this could be a career for me. This is something that could extend on beyond. And I think for me, what was interesting is, I ran that company for about 10 or 12 years, and then I sold it, and then transitioning into professional soccer, first here in the US and then in Europe. Kind of what's interesting what I realized in sports is like, you have wins and losses. In Europe, you have promotions and relegations. Like in the business world, it's like, if you do well, if you make money, you did well, obviously. In sports, that's a piece of it, obviously. But when we got promoted, for instance, of our club in Denmark, there was no greater feeling I've ever had in my life, where it's just like the world is telling you did a really good job, right? Obviously, a relegation does the opposite, but everything you did off the field, on the field, everything tells you, yes, you won the league and you got promoted to the next level, and now you're going to make more money and you did a great job. And to a certain extent, that exists in the business world, but doesn't exist in the business world. So it's a really interesting environment where it's different and similar in some ways, but yeah, it's kind of been very organic for me, one project to the next. They've all had similarities and different challenges. And obviously the international piece is the thing that I'm most interested / challenging the most, in terms of, running a soccer club in Kansas City, Missouri, and running a soccer club in Denmark or Scotland or France. Like, in some ways they're very similar, in other ways they are drastically different. And I think that's something, to the point of a lot of Americans I work with, is like helping them understand, like, hey, you've built a company, you've been successful. Maybe you've been successful in the NFL, or the NBA, or MLS, or USL. Like, it's a totally different ballgame over in Europe, and a completely different model. And that's something that takes time for people to learn.
So when you are right now, currently, David Workin, who is part of the Sacramento Kings ownership group, and he's tied to Rochester, New York FC. When you're trying to bring folks in under the tent with your ideas, what are those conversations like? Was it easy bringing in someone like Mr. Dworkin? Is it more difficult with others to have them understand what you're trying to do? What are those conversations like?
Most of the conversations are pretty easy because they're folks that I know and I trust closely. So, the goal for me, I don't want to bring in random folks off the street. Sure, that's great. Everyone needs money when they're trying to raise a fund or raise a group to buy a club. But for me, it's about folks I know, folks I trust, who are philosophically aligned, many of whom have gone down this rodeo before in some form. So, obviously, David's done this in minor league soccer and has expertise from the NBA. We have a guy, Shashi Vaswani, who owns Laredo Heat, which is in I think they're PDL, MPSL. He's done it for 20 years, has maybe the best small stadium, I think, in the US that no one's talking about. We have a bunch of folks that have done, I think we have some folks that also own a PDL team, folks that know exactly on a day-to-day basis what we're working through. So when I have a board meeting or when I need to go to my investor group and say, hey guys, this is what I'm going through, we can collectively figure out a way to move forward and work with me to help have success in the project. So it's not difficult conversations at all. These are people all I like on a personal level. David's coming out this weekend to Scotland with one of our other board members, so we'll be spending time together. So I think sometimes what I've seen is there is a push to just figure out how do we just grab money if we're putting this together, right? How do we figure out how to raise capital? And again, don't get me wrong, it's important to raise capital, because otherwise, in many cases, you can't get these deals done. But if you don't do it with people who are aligned with you or do it for the wrong reasons, that can create some serious governance issues. And if you don't have alignment at the top of your organization, we see this across professional sports. If your ownership, if your minority guys and majority guys are fighting with each other and there's not alignment and there's not a cohesive strategy at the board level, that trickles down to the rest of the organization and you're going to have a lot of trouble having success. So that's my philosophy, just bringing in philosophically aligned people into my inner circle.
Yeah, and Laredo, I think the stadium is like 4,000 in League Two, and good luck finding a seat in that place when Laredo is really humming. When you are looking at clubs in general, I mean, do you have a specific geographic footprint that you want to sit there and go, yeah, I want to look at Eastern Europe, I want to look at Western Europe, I want to look at Scandinavia, I want to look here, I want to look here? Or is it just stuff that comes up organically where, yeah, okay, I see where this could be, beneficial to me and our growth of an MCO or something like that? Do you have a specific footprint that you look at first and then branch out from there? Or is it just stuff that you go through in observations and go, yeah, I think that could work?
Yeah, I think some of it's organic. I mean, obviously things come up and I see trends. I see where are people investing, where are opportunities, where does the financial model work, and where do I think it doesn't work? Um, I've noticed a trend in the last, I would say, 2 years that most investors are interested in the UK and Ireland when they're going to Europe. I'm not going to say that every single one just does that, but there's been a trend towards the UK and Ireland, which start to focus my attention a little bit towards those markets. I do get asked about things like Eastern Europe. We did a project in Scandinavia. They all have their pros and cons, but for me, I think this really happened. Like Scotland happened organically. I just started looking at P&Ls of clubs when I was doing consulting work, and I was like, didn't realize this market makes more sense to me than I thought it did. So it depends on the investor and depends on the group. Like I do get people that call me, say, hey, I want to buy a club in Poland. And then I give them my 2 cents on the pros and cons. There are places I like more than others. Places are more challenging to do business than others. I think one of the reasons I chose Scotland this time is that easier to do business. Language wasn't an issue, much less cultural differences. I mean, when we were in Scandinavia, it was much more difficult. Obviously, language wasn't as much of an issue because everyone spoke English in Denmark. But if you go to Eastern Europe, if you go to Spain, Italy, France, the ease of doing business, it just becomes very difficult to do business in these places. And so it just depends on what the philosophy is and the risk profile. I'm very much not the kind of person who is just like, hey, a deal just popped up, that looks interesting, because these deals float, whether it's brokers or agents. There's always deals popping up and they look attractive, and then you dig in behind the curtain and the financial model doesn't work or whatnot. So to answer your question, a little bit more opportunistic, but there's certainly markets where I would not spend a lot of time in, for sure.
Okay, so let me go back to that in a second. Are you the kind of investor that zigs when everybody else zags, or do you sit there and understand where the wave is going and you'll be a part of it, but you're not going to look at it from top shelf? You're going to look at like second shelf and maybe second division, third division kind of a thing. Are you a zigger or you go with the flow?
I mean, generally, what's the comment when the stock market, when everyone's selling, you should be buying, and vice versa? I mean, generally, that is my philosophy. I think it's hard you have to align that with risk tolerance, right? Like there's markets out there that I think are amazing. Japan is one of them. Mexico is one of them. I don't have the high enough risk tolerance right now to go and be a first mover in some of those markets. So when I look at it, I'm like, okay, maybe I'll go into a Scotland, which is definitely not being a first mover. There's a lot of American investment there, but maybe I'll just take a different take on it, which is going to a much smaller club with an entirely different thesis around it, which is a little bit of a zagging when everyone, zigzagging. So generally speaking, I like to do things differently than others. I think there is a herd mentality in this industry where everyone's trying to kind of copy the next person. I remember a couple of years back, there was an article in the New York Times about the first American group that went into Belgium and how this was this hot player sales or player development pool. And then within like a year, 8 other groups of Americans came into Belgium, presumably because they read the article in the New York Times. So for me, I'm like, that's not the way you want to do things. You want to be looking at undervalued markets, undervalued business models around that. And so again, to be fair, I did Scotland, which is not off anyone's radar, but I think our take on Scotland is different than other people.
So where are your red flags these days? And you can divulge them if you want, but there are some places that you don't even go. Where are those red flags and why do you think they exist?
I think generally there's just difficult places to do business. South America is one of those places.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are spots in Eastern Europe that are one of those places, and that comes down to ease of doing business, corruption. Just corruption is a big one. Like, you're owning a business in, whatever country in Eastern Europe, Poland's gotten better. Poland has started to become a much more credible place for foreign investment to come in. But, if you're going into Hungary or Slovakia or some of these countries I've seen deals in, good luck having your money protected and making sure that it doesn't disappear, and hiring the right people who you can trust and dealing with all those cultural differences, like that becomes really challenging. The South America thing I find fascinating. Obviously, there's been a push towards Brazil recently, which, of course, buy a club in Brazil, you own the talent pipeline that you don't have to be buying players for 30, 40, $50 million for. But doing business in a place like that is incredibly difficult. And what's going to happen most of the times, and this goes to the MCO conversation, is if you're buying a club in Brazil, for instance, for an MCO, and you're trying to save money because you're owning the talent pipeline, if operationally, because of corruption, because of leakage, whatever it is, poor management, you're losing a lot of money. It's just going to eat into any sort of upside you have by owning the club in the first place. I think we've seen this with Texter's Group a little bit too, with Botafogo. Like, they've had a lot of success, but that's a crazy place to run a business. So those are the places off the top of my head that I try to generally stay away from. Obviously, from a player side, Africa is a really tough one. Anytime someone comes in a room and says, hey, I have a pipeline of players from Africa, I really roll my eyes, because there's only 1 or 2 folks I know out there who are credibly developing and identifying talent out of Africa. It's a really, really difficult spot to bring players in from for a bunch of different reasons. So there's definitely red flags I've seen all over the industry over the years.
Yeah, we are going through and when we're done here with you and me, we are going to have our seemingly daily dose of John Texter 101, which is turned into a master's class of MCO. And dealing with that from our footprint with a lot of our fan base. You got 4 points to make up before you're even with Cove Rangers, but you've already played 23 matches. And we've actually had the folks from Hamilton Academical on and caught up with Mr. Smethurst and got his perspective on things. What's it going to take to climb out of the basement and get into the relegation playoff spot that Cove is in right now, 4 points above you, and they've got a match in hand?
Yeah, so we've made some moves with the window. Obviously, it's difficult, right? We were right on the verge of buying the club, and we hadn't owned the club yet as the window opened, so it created a difficult situation. But we brought in 5 new players. We brought back the co-leading scorer of League One from last season, who played for us. He just came back this window. We're hoping to get another loan player who we had earlier in the season back, who was one of our leading scorers. So, I think we're giving ourselves a fighting shot. Obviously, it's difficult. It's a pretty deep hole we've dug over the first half of the season. But we're optimistic that the team can turn around. We're really pleased with the manager. We think slowly over time we're going to build up infrastructure. So, look, I think we have to be realistic. Relegation, of course, is a possibility. But for us, it's about building the right infrastructure in the long term, looking towards the summer, whatever division we're in, to build a recruitment strategy, bring in data, which this club hasn't used before. There's just a lot of things this club needs, and a lot of it's not going to get solved today or right now. So hopeful we stay optimistic. We've strengthened the squad to give us a good fighting chance, but ultimately the conversation is this is a 5, 6, 7 year project.
Okay, and I know I've kept you into added time, and I apologize for that. So then one more question.
Sure.
Is relegation a failure in eyes? Because you'd mentioned that earlier, where promotion, oh, success; relegation, oh, failure. But is every relegation a failure, and is every promotion a success?
Yes, I think so. Obviously not for us because we just got here. I'm not going to say we're trying to keep the club up, but Kelty Hearts getting relegated this year tells you you did something wrong. Something didn't work. That could be you didn't keep the players healthy enough. You didn't construct the roster right. You didn't have the right manager. Whatever you didn't budget properly. Like, relegation, sure, it could be bad luck or injuries or whatnot, but relegation tells you did something wrong and you need to change. And that's why you see clubs that don't change, they get relegated multiple times, right? So, it's this. What was the NFL coach that's like, you are what your record is. Like, your record, over a long time horizon, this is a long season, it's 36 games. Like, you get relegated over 36 games, so soccer gods are telling you did something wrong, and like, that's totally fine. We know that. We know things need to change. So at times relegations can actually be a positive thing, where it's a real wake-up call to organizations to come in and say, hey, you know what, we need to make changes, serious changes. The bigger problem I see is clubs that hang on. Maybe they barely stay up and they're like, oh, everything's fine, we stayed up. Well, it's like, no, you were 1 point or one match away from getting relegated, right? Like, you need to make and again, to my point earlier, a lot of these football clubs have a real hard time making any sort of institutional changes. And so it's like an immovable object. Things move very, very slowly. When a relegation happens, there's a lot more ammunition for people like me to come in and say, guys, look, club got relegated. We all know change needs to happen. And so that's a little bit the way I look at it. Again, there's luck involved. You go in a promotion playoff, you don't get it. Sometimes there's luck involved, but relegation, like, you're doing something wrong if you get relegated. There's no way around it. People spin it otherwise, then they're just deluding themselves, I think.
Okay. Jordan Gardner, Grand Exalted Poobah, Hearts Football LLC. I cannot thank you enough for the conversation and for the education. Obviously, we saw the story, and it's one of those storylines that we continue to go down with whomever is engaged in it. And you were the next one on the list with Kelty Hearts and what you're doing at Hearts Football. We knocked on your door, and can't thank you for answering your LinkedIn as quickly as you did. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me, John. Really appreciate it.
Don't be a stranger. Come back anytime, and we'll be keeping an eye on you.
All right. Thanks.